All kinds of silliness. We're live. It is 11:35 in the AM still, just by a little bit. And today we're going to talk about, I have a photo up of photo of the guys that were doing the dyno testing in Sweden with the AMR 500. They sent me a photo of the layout of the disassembled AMR 500 root style supercharger. And then also they were at the time doing some work on a small twin screw that I think is going to be used for maybe the side-by-side industry or something. But he just sent me some data on that, and it's pretty cool. I mean, it's a little blower. It's bigger than the AMR 500, and obviously capable of a lot more power and more RPM, and it survived survived all the testing and stuff. So it is in every way basically a better blower than that little probably the one that they got might have even been a Chinese copy of the original Japanese blower, of the ASIN blower. But I don't know. I don't know that for sure. What we do know is that blower was run on the dyno at 5 and or at various speeds, 5,000, 10,000. I think that they tried 15,000 RPM. It was run at various different boost levels just so that we could get both flow data, because they're measuring lots of that stuff, measuring flow data and then discharge temperature. And then as it turned out, also the combination of maximum blower speed and or temperature, because if you're running very high boosts, you obviously put more temperature, it's subjected to more temperature. And that ultimately becomes the problem. You can have a few problems with a supercharger. One, you can, the snout and the bearing and stuff, you can wear the bearings out. If you have to, you can overspeed the bearings. You can get the bearings so that they don't have any lubrication. They can gall up and the bearings can go bad. You can also, what happened on this one, and what is fairly common, is if you get the blower running fast enough and hot enough, what happens is there's a critical distance in the supercharger between the rotor, the end of the rotor at its, at its longest distance between the center line of the rotor and the outer edge of the rotor, between that and the blower housing. That's how it makes boost. Basically, what it does is the lobe spins around and grabs a certain amount of air depending on the displacement, grabs a certain amount of air, grabs it from one side of the blower, spins it over, and blows it out the other side. Pretty simple for a roots blower. The clearance between the rotor and the housing, you want as little clearance there as possible, because otherwise what happens is when the blower grabs air from one side to the other, it grabs air, at atmospheric pressure, grabs it, forces on the other side. Well, on the other side, you're now building pressure in the manifold. So what happens is if there's leakage, which this is what we call, if there's leakage past the rotor, pressure will want to go from the high pressure side back to the low pressure side. So you'll want to basically backfeed what the rotor is trying to do by grabbing all the air and forcing it over to the boosted side. So if there's too much clearance, and this is always the problem, if there's too much clearance, you can get boost, basically bleeding back by the spinning rotor. That's not good. So you want it as tight as possible. The problem is if you make it tight, you don't have room for growth, because the rotor obviously operates at a variety of different temperatures. And so we have a variety of different changing clearances because of those temperatures. And so you have a change in temperature of the housing, of the outer part of the housing, and also of the rotors. The rotors are different. You also have a change in temperature gradient across the rotor and across the housing. Some parts of it may be hotter than others. So you have not just overall changes in the distance between the rotor and the housing, between that clearance, it may be different on different parts of the rotor. And so you can see the problem here. You have to have enough clearance to where no matter what temperature the rotor and the housing and the differential get to be, and when you have the growth that shrinks up that clearance, you have to have enough clearance in it to where they never touch. You don't want to do that. You don't want them to touch. Okay, because if they do, you get what we have in that photo there. I'm going to show you. The rotor, if the rotor contacts the housing, then it destroys the rotor or the housing. What they do, what the OEMs did, and what whoever made this AMR 500, they did it, and on the Gen 5 M90 supercharger, same thing, is they coat the rotors. to get them to seal a little bit better. And then if you get close enough to where you're just wearing the coating off, just the coating's okay. I mean, you don't want to get a bunch of that coating in the motor, but that's better than the metal parts that you would get from the rotor and or housing. You don't want that to be deposited into the motor. And it also gives you a little bit of a warning sign that, hey, look, you're wearing the coating off. You're probably doing something with that supercharger that you should not be doing, which is something that we all do as performance people. I mean, look, I took a M90 blower and spun it way past its, a used M90 blower that we know nothing about, put it on a 4.8 and spun it way past where it's designed to go. And that's what we do. But herein lies the problem. So when they're doing the testing, and admittedly on the blower dyno, they're subjecting it to something that is not really seen too often out in the wild, out in the real world, except for when people like me do Silver State runs, or when you guys have people in like boats running at wide open throttle for extended periods of time. Then this thing is under heat and under boost for a really, really long time. So when they'll run it on a blower dyno, you could run it on the blower dyno and stabilize it so that you get like a real temperature. When I run something on the engine dyno and I'm using a Type K thermocouple and we're measuring discharge temperature, we get some sort of a starting point when the data collection starts on the dyno. So we load it at 3,000 or 2,500 and let it go to 6,500. And during that run, we're logging the charge temperature produced by the supercharger in the manifold. But because of the speed of the logging and that particular thermocouple, you're not really getting a true reading of what's going on, or at least not totally. So what happens if you run a blower at whatever speed we're running that thing at 3,000 and 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, and you just park it as a stationary load for 30 seconds or a minute? You'll get whatever that blower will be making in terms of temperature, because what will happen is it will come up to temperature and then it will just stabilize. So because you have a given amount of cold air coming in and it's producing a given amount of hot air coming out, and then you'll get a true reading. You're like, okay, look, when we did our transition run from 3,000 to 6,000 RPM or 6,500, we got up to 180 degrees. But if you park it there at 6,000 or 6,500 RPM, maybe the thing gets over 200 degrees. And so if you're using the blower a lot, like I said, like for me running a Silver State, guys running a boat, or if you're doing, I don't know if guys do roll racing out on the freeway, if you're in the throttle for, minutes at a time, I think you'd run out of room before that happens. But if you're at wide open throttle for long periods of time, if you're just going through the quarter mile, unless you're doing no lift shifts, you're giving it a little bit of time to breathe, and you're only on the throttle at wide open throttle for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 seconds, whatever your quarter mile time is. So it's not experiencing what we experience on the blower dyno, and not experiencing obviously what we experience road race course or wide open throttle for 30 minutes like we do, or in the boat applications. But that also is possible. So what happened when they were testing the AMR blower, they ran it at the lower speeds and the lower boosts. And then when they tried to run at higher speeds and higher boosts, ultimately the little blower just said, look, I can't do this anymore. And that's what they had. They actually had rotor contact. First, obviously, it started eating the coating for the rotors off. That went, and then you had contact between the rotors and the blower housing, and so it ends up marring up both of those. And in that case, since it's a $150 blower, it's just a throwaway. There would be no reason to try to rebuild it, or I don't know how they would resurface that. I don't know how they would rebore the inside of that, because you can't really put a bigger rotor pack in, because if you made the opening bigger, I don't know how they would do that. Maybe you would just put a new housing if the rotor pack is still good, but it looks like the rotor pack is scuffed up. So I think ultimately both of them that would need to be changed. And like I said, in this particular case, it's a $150 blower. So you just go, oh, look, all these broken parts, just throw that away, and then just get another one and go, hey, look, important safety tip. We don't run it at 15 pounds of boost at 1,500 or 15,000 RPM for a minute at a time, because it's just not going to work. If you're just, ripping through the gears, it's probably going to be fine. Or because it's a roots blower anyway, you probably shouldn't be running it at that boost level anyway. But you know, we can get into all that, but that's an important thing. And it happens with a lot of different superchargers. This happens with twin screw superchargers too. And the thing that, like the little one that they're showing, and I'll go ahead and show you guys a photo here so you guys can get a little bit better idea. So here is this top one is the twin screw, and this is the AMR 500. You can see that the coating, this black stuff, is the coating was gone. You can see down here, you can see how scuffed up the rotor is. And that's what happens. It starts touching. So what you'd see is all of these marks, all of these hash marks there, all that scuffing. That's also going to be like that on the inside of the rotor housing. Those little twin screws you can see is bigger than the AMR 500 is. The AMR 500 is a 1/2 liter blower. I think that twin screw it's a 1 or a 1.5 liter blower. So it's capable of making, I don't think it's a 1.5. I think it's a 1 liter or maybe even a sub 1 liter blower. At any rate, it's obviously much more capable than your typical $150 AMR 500 blower. But that's what happened to it. And that sort of coating is done on a lot of stuff. So on a twin screw blower, they have even more of a problem of this temperature differential because they have cold air going in, and then they have internal compression. So on the rotors themselves, you have, the front side of the rotor might be cold. And we're using cold as not as an absolute thing. It may have a cooler temperature than the discharge side, because the discharge side, all the compression has happened. And so you have a change in temperature. You have a temperature gradient going across the rotors. And so the clearances for the rotors relative to the housing are different as we migrate across the housing there. So they have problems there also, things that need to be addressed. And again, it's always going to be some kind of compromise. And then the compromise becomes more so when we're trying to do the things that we shouldn't be doing because we're all trying to maximize the power output and spin the blower faster than it should be, and then hoping that it doesn't break, and all of that stuff. Let's see if I can get my let's see. Just gotta pick that up. Whenever I leave, it does that. So those are some of the problems. And then like on the earlier roots blowers, one of the things that they did is they put Teflon strips on them. So the rotor would have enough clearance between the rotor and the housing, and that would be okay, and it wouldn't damage itself. And then the Teflon strip basically is a wearable item that, provides good sealing for a period of time until it wears out. And then that's something that you can replace. So that's why you run the strips on them. And that seems to work fairly well. And again, these are not like long strips. These are very, very small ones because the clearance isn't that great. You just need enough, just like ring clearance for the, when we're heating the rings up, when we're running under boost. You don't need a lot, but you need some. And the Teflon strips just take that up, make the blower more efficient, and then for a while it will produce more boost and more power, and then allow you to, the wearable item or the sacrificial item is something that's easily replaced. I mean, you have to take the blower apart and do that, but that's not an insurmountable thing. That's pretty easy. That's much less expensive and easier to do than replacing a whole rotor pack or a whole housing or all of the blower. And then also, it's a much better deal. The little bit of Teflon that you would be getting into the motor from the strips, not a big deal. Your motor will easily process that. But getting broken rotor or housing parts in your motor also can take the motor out. So you don't want that to happen either. So it's very important to keep it within its, thermal and mechanical RPM limits of the supercharger, which I didn't do. I completely ignored when I did my testing on the LS. It wasn't really attached to anything, so I didn't have to worry about parts coming out of it and getting into the motor. At least if parts came out of it, parts would have just come out of it and fell on the dyno floor or whatever, which would have been good video. And again, it's a 150 horsepower sacrificial blower. just in the name of science so that we could figure out where we should be running this. Most of the guys that are running these things are not running them at these elevated boost levels and are not running them on motors that where they would be trying to max out this type of supercharger anyway. But I still want to test one. I want to get a Metro, either buy a Metro and run it on the chassis dyno, which would be cool to be able to drive it around and just hear that blower whine, which would be very cool. Or we'll get the 1 liter sprint motor up on the dyno with an adapter plate and see if we can't run that. So it'd be cool. Either way, I definitely want to run an AMR on something so people can see that. And then that way I can also include this blower dyno data as additional data, because people want to see, you know, people were all mad when I did the first video. They all wanted to see it blowing into the motor. Obviously 150 horsepower blower trying to feed a 440 horsepower NA motor is not going to work very well. But we want to run that on something to show, hey, look, the NA motor to this, the boosted motor to this. We ran an intercooler, we ran E85, whatever, all of those things, you know, like we do on blowers. And it's just cool to see that on a 150 horsepower blower, and especially one that costs $150. So $1 per horsepower, I guess. Roman, what's going on? So we'll see what you guys got going on. Okay, should I buy a cheap, low horsepower project car to run the AMR 500 blower on? That will be our poll for today. Richard, haven't been on a long time, but I do catch up the videos always before I do the replay. Can you do a 12.559 Cummins test? We don't run diesel engines on the engine dyno. My junk is too hot just with street driving, manifold temps and coolant temps. It's been a failed task trying to improve either one. Tim, what motor is it? GSM problem was at your end. Okay. Pro Street 57 with a Cadillac 514 constantly ran at 220 degrees. Friend of mine recommended Z-Max and it never went above 180. So some kind of coolant thing changed it that much. That seems like a lot. The MR blower is from Asen made them for some Nissan application, I think. Yeah, we did overspun the blower and over boosted the blower too. Because I don't think it happened until the way that they run it on the blower dyno is they'll spin it at a certain speed and then you regulate the discharge of it to produce the boost that you want to produce. So you have the blower speed and then the boost, which the thing that you're regulating is basically the engine. So whatever speed you spin the blower at, the motor, the NA power output of the motor is going to determine what the boost is with that blower speed on that motor. Yes, spinning the blower too fast is not good. But also, it's just like with rings, getting too much temperature in the rotor pack causes a problem, too much growth, not enough clearance, and then you have what we see here, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of bad stuff. 71%. Should I buy a cheap car? Who would say no to that? Ugh, poke myself in the eye. So I spoke with Brule today about going down to do some more dyno testing. So that will be cool. I'm going to try to build the twin M90 deal. Off the subject, what do you think about a VS Racing 8896 turbo on a daily driver strip car? So the thing we always ask is what kind of power are you trying to make? The turbo size is irrelevant for a daily driver. It doesn't make any difference. The turbo is just going to drive around. Any size turbo that you put on there is just going to drive around when you're driving around and you're not in boost. It's going to be like the turbo is not even there. So it's not even really going to care. The turbo sizing should be, you should choose that based on how much power you want to make. Is the 88, is that turbo going to be the turbo that you want to make whatever power you want to make when you go to the strip? And, or if it's a daily driver thing or more of a driver thing, is it going to be responsive enough to have fun on the street? So if you put a turbo on that's a 1500 horsepower turbo, but you only ever try to use 700 of it on the street, all the rest of that is just wasted lag. So put a smaller turbo on there that will be more fun on the street. So hopefully that helps. Is this referring to your last video on the torque drop? No, this is I showed the photo earlier of a little AMR 500 supercharger. That's a half-liter blower, not the M90 that we ran. Tim, 351 Windsor, 7875, 180 degree thermostat, 2 small push fans that fit behind the Fox body bumper, on 3 intercooler, almost no room behind the 3-core radiator to the engine side. Okay. So this sounds to me like not enough airflow through the radiator. .9 liter on the ZL1 is spinning 2.55 and a 917 on the lower. That's really fast. 12 to 14 pounds, but I have seen others spin faster than that on a similar setup. The boost would have been higher, but for the bore and stroke. Actually, Ragtop, what you want is boost lower than that. So you want more NA power from that so you can bring the boost down. A bone stock 2014 GT500, can I go with a 3.6 Kenny bell without changing the factory rods? If it's okay, at what RPM should I shift? Yes, you can put a Kenny bell blower upgrade on that thing. You should be worried less about the rods than you are about the ring gap, the factory ring gap. You should be adding ring gap to that thing. And then how much power are you wanting to make? And you shouldn't be thinking about maximum RPM. My 7875 on a 6 liter is too much on the street. It breaks traction as soon as it makes boost. I need to turn the boost down. Yeah, I guess you could have it be too responsive. Does the 4.8 have a sticky lifter? I don't know. I don't know why the thing is repeatable now, but went down the first 2 runs and then became repeatable. I calculated the Roush M90 RPM on the 4.6. They're spun to 18.5 so they're going over 20,000 on them. That's a lot. James, what I put up was the AMR 500 supercharger. The thumbnail is an AMR 500 supercharger that was damaged during the blower dyno testing in Sweden because it had too much RPM and too much heat. Poll question is, should I get a small, low horsepower project car to put an AMR 500 on? Attack. They're in attack mode. Soak in diesel and assemble. I don't think it's a lifter problem. Those are the original lifters, with the exception of, I think, 2 of them. I know we replaced at least 1, but might be 2 of them. One of which was damaged because it had rotated. Richard, have you done a 500 versus 600 versus 750 carb dyno on at any given horsepower? I haven't, and I've wanted to do that for a long time because Westech has a 650, 750, 850, 950. You could go to, if you wanted to go a little bigger than that. Most things we wouldn't do that unless it's a really big block. But I think ideally, like you're talking about on a small motor, 250 horsepower motor, 500 CFM is more than enough. But what I'd want to do is do a, you know, a 500, a 600, a 700, whatever, on a low horsepower one, and then do it on a, you know, 500 or 600 horsepower one, and do it on that test too, and see. The other thing that you have to think about is it the difference in power that you might see from those carburetors if we jet them and make the air fuel, try to even all that out. Even then, the difference that you might see in the carburetors might not just be from the flow change. You have difference in the quality of the fuel, let's say, from the metering blocks. Some carburetors, even at the same flow rating, make better power than others. Have you ever tested an IHI twin screw? We tested a lot of twin screw superchargers, but not the one on the Mazda, not the one from the Mazda. And took the ZL1 out today. 50 degrees. Yeah, that's definitely boost weather, right? Tyler, if we lost a lifter and that cylinder wasn't working as well, we'd see that in air fuel. So swear by getting 160 degree thermostat. And the problem with, if that's in response to the not having enough airflow through the radiator, is sometimes a change in thermostat temperature, opening it earlier, doesn't cure that problem because it still gets up to temperature. Sometimes if you can open it up and get it flowing earlier, sometimes you could stop it from getting past that threshold. But more often than not, if you're not getting enough flow and you're putting the heat into the motor, that it will continue to rise if it doesn't have enough transfer medium across that core. Yeah, we didn't have 8 EGTs. We had 8 O2 sensors, because EGTs don't tell you the same thing. But yeah, 8 O2s would tell us if there's a bad cylinder. Also, what I need to do is a compression test, and maybe a compression and a leak down test to get an idea of what's going on. Maybe we have, maybe we have bad holes. The compression test might tell us if something's going on with the lifter. Maybe. I wish I would have done that when the motor was warm, though. Sometimes you can't do all of the data all the time. I think I'm going to end up doing a disassembly video of that 4.8, because I think it's probably time. And we'll switch the blower over to the 5.3. Make those big power numbers. Big crazy Richie power numbers. I'm wondering if the blower can be set up in a mill so that I can mill the opening and not have to do it with a die grinder. So I can mill the opening out to, 3.5 inches or 90 millimeters or 92 millimeters. If I could bore that thing all the way out. One thing I did notice is if we do that, it's probably going to be intersecting the coolant passage lines that are in the bottom of that flange. So I'd probably have to insert aluminum dowels into that and then grind those, and then they'll be like half moons or 3/4 moons or something by the time that machining process is over. Oh, how about an 85 Chevette? that would be cool. I'd like one that's running and not one like Chad got. If you tune for best power, you don't need air fuel ratios, but EGTs will tell you cylinder balance and load. EGTs will help you, but they won't tell you air fuels. And if you're tuning for best power, you can, especially on a boosted application, you can tune yourself right out of having a motor. Because sometimes with the boosted stuff, it'll keep adding power until it hurts itself. Mill the blower straight and delete the coolant into the blower. Yeah, I don't remember now if the flange, if the base of the blower as it bolts to the snout, if that is parallel with the throttle body flange. If it is, that's would be great. Or we could obviously weld on another one, and that's possible too. Then I would just bandsaw it off and weld on a flange weld on a 3.5-inch tube with a flange on it. That's easy to make, and then do it that way. But it would be cool if I could just mill that out, and then you could mill that out and then do all the porting that the Jokers guys are going to do it. We'd have to weld it. Yeah, I don't really want to do that. Let's see if I can see if those on any of my photos, if those flanges are, if I think it's possible those flanges are parallel. Let's get rid of that one. I'll go to this one. They actually look like they might be. That would be beneficial if they are. Chevette curb weights 1900 at a blower into that crazy nutty inline four and go. It would be cool. I'd love to find a Chevette. I like them. I would like to find one that runs and, you know, hopefully something that has a good clutch in it. I know, Racer D. I know you're all motor guy. All motor guys are guys that don't want to make a lot of power. That's right. I just threw shade. Cut the flange off past the coolant plugs. Yeah, what I wanted to do was cut that flange off anyway to where the opening would be big enough to accept the 3.5-inch tube. It's because if we cut that off and then I just weld on the 3.5, not me, if somebody else welds on the aluminum tubing and then we just port match that, and then it all goes into, you know, then it's all big enough. To an X19, that would be cool. I see all kinds of stuff on Marketplace when I'm looking, little Toyotas, Yaris's, and even earlier ones, little Mazda trucks, and so there's lots of cool stuff. Mike is the 632,000 horsepower all motor guy. That's a good one. Yep, or Triumph TR7, although I just don't even know if it would hold together long enough for that. Even though I'm thinking about talking to you about a turbo recommendation on my Iron Duke. Yeah, we could. That would be cool. I'd love to see that. I would just give you a turbo for that. Are you going to run it? Are you going to run it carbureted, or are you going to run it EFI with the turbo on it? An old Jaguar, but I don't want a Jaguar because that's too much motor. We need something that makes like NA makes 100 horsepower or less. You could track it and revisit your youth. Where do you think my youth went? Yeah, Racer, you're a small turbo for that's going to be really easy to size. A Yugo would be cool. All of those would be cool. Just finding the right one at the right price. And what I want is a beat up ratty one on the outside that has a decent running motor and a good clutch. That's kind of what I care about. A D-Series Honda would also be good. I have a lot of experience with Honda, so that could be a possibility. Coolant ports circulate the temperature of the radiator into the blower. Yeah, we don't run those on the 4.8. They're not hooked up to anything. They're just plugged. Dave, you have the microsquirt running on it now. Multi-port EFI on E85. That's good. So that's perfect. If you got E85, it wants boost then. The Y6 and 7, the best Honda single overhead cam ever. See, even a base D series would be fine. Put an M90. I put an M90 on a Saturn 1.9 several years ago. That's good size. That's a lot bigger than an AMR 500 is, but will Call of Duty ever make another good multiplayer game? I don't know. I don't play Call of Duty, so I'm the wrong guy to ask. Do you need a ride-on lawnmower? My yard isn't big enough for that. LS, a 3.8 liter Mustang. That motor's way too big and makes too much power already. Oh, Dave, it has 200 PSI cranking compression. That just means you need to put a lot more camshaft in it. Go front wheel drive the Chevy Citation. Yeah, get whatever the X41s or X11s or something like that. It's got to be that's a 2.8, right, on the Citation. Also the name of a very famous racing horse. Maybe that's what they named it after. They used to show them stock race those things. Yeah, I would imagine. Did you guys have to do a custom cam for yours, Dave? Yeah, a Chevy Sprint would be ideal. That's what I'm looking at really, are Metros, not a Sprint. If I find a Sprint, that would be cool too. I have the Sprint motor, the turbo motor, and I want to run the blower and the turbo together. That's why I want to get that on the engine dyno. But a car driving around would be also cool. The X11, that's right. The local police department with a Citation police car. It's not the ultimate pursuit vehicle. It was the Pursuee. Remote mount blower. It would almost certainly have to be a remote mount for this blower on anything that we put it on. Probably would be in place of a air conditioning, sacrificial air conditioning. That way we could run it through an intercooler. And if it's like some of the Metros where you have them fuel injected and carbureted, if it's carbureted, that would be cool. Then we would just put the carburetor and have the blower, the carburetor just be a draw through thing. Be interesting to replace the turbo on a VW TDI engine with an AMR 500. I think it would do worse with the blower than that turbo. Lenati did one for you. It made 225 foot-pounds, 210 horsepower. Nice. I knew a guy that swapped a 350 into a Monza. They had V8s from the factory, so that shouldn't have been too hard, right? The TDI is rated in my Jetta at 90 horsepower with the turbo. And then how much more extra fuel do you have it wicked up to? The Monza is really popular out at Bonneville. A lot of guys have run that. The M90 test has my father-in-law worried about his 455 Buick. He didn't think my 4.6 M90 would compete until the test came out. And don't you have the Roush one on yours anyway? Thought the Monza Mirage was neat looking, but the body kit was so-so. Yeah, Dave, the power curve will be the same. Wherever the thing's making power now, if you just add 7 pounds or whatever to that, it's just going to be 50% better everywhere. 512 foot-pounds from an M90 that it didn't. Yeah, that's what we talked about that last night. Doesn't on that TDI, doesn't the turbo come up like immediately on that thing? A 2.3 Ranger might be good, although that's like 90 or 100 horsepower, right? I lost motivation with the snow at 17 degrees. I feel you. When it drops below 60, it's too cold. I feel the AMR 500 isn't really good for normal displacement engines. We used something like on a snowmobile 3 years ago. Well, it is good for normal, smaller displacement motors. So it just needs to be something that's making less than 100 horsepower. So all of the little 4-cylinder things that fit into that category, or unfortunately some V6s also, it will work on and supply and boost it up to 50%. It can boost it up to 150 horsepower. And actually, the better we make the NA motor, the less pressure we're asking the blower to supply. And so the happier it will be. So like it will be happier spinning at whatever RPM we're spinning it at, making 5 pounds than it will be making 10 pounds. So we'll have to figure that out. Smart car would be possible. Although how is working on the smart car? Is that problematic? A3 RX-7 would make an MPG turbo car. So a fuel mile? Are you talking about a fuel mileage car? An RX-7 is a terrible fuel mileage car, if that's what you're saying, but a turbo car would be good. Smart cars just drop the subframe, pick up the car, put it in the corner. A Ford EXP. Oh yeah, that would be good. Or an Escort. I would love to have, a Metro would be good, but a classic thing like that, or an older Corolla. Any of those would be awesome. Richard doing engine swap. They always have bad rotaries. I haven't seen an RX-7 for sale in a long time. Geo trackers are also possible. 73 Celica. Yeah, my buddy Bernie has a Corolla that is really cool. Team Bonsai. Tighten the engine, babe. It has room enough for SE or a turbo. Yeah, that's why I like the Honda, and like the Metro has a ton of room. I have a couple of AMR 300s waiting for an Austin 7 engine. Formula SA team published their blower dyno results. Interested to see how the 500 compares. I can, if you send me an email, Ambling Man, I can send you over the blower dyno data. If EXP versus Escort go EXP, it'll be neat. I do like those bodies. I think that they're unique. Although I have to say I like the Escort a little better. Matt, tell me a little bit more about the stroker, but 468 horsepower isn't even that's not even a good cammed 6-liter. So he's got something else going on. Unless that's 468 wheel horsepower. Borg Warner VNT 15. Okay. Not a Z-Tech Focus. A Z-Tech Focus already makes too much power. I obviously have done a lot of those. I mean, I wrote that book on them. And so I've tested those a ton, but that already makes pretty good power. I still have thoughts of a certain blue 85 EXP that I did a timing belt on. I couldn't get it running. Uh-oh. Was it timed incorrectly? LeBaron, a 2.2 NA motor is right in that range too. I spent a small fortune just building a proper rear axle and suspension for my E90. It's all the stuff. Like the power is easy, but all the other stuff. I have a friend with an 86 RX-7. He bought it new. It's all original and getting rusty. Uh-oh. I like the earlier ones, but any RX-7 would be fine. And see, that's what I'm hoping to find. Oh, I'm hoping to find, like I said, a beat up one. Like, I don't care what the paint looks like. I don't care what the interior looks like. I'd like it to not be like moldy and stuff. It's not be a health hazard. But I just want it to be like mechanically sound or something that, you know, can be fixed. Ever think about a boat? I don't want to do a boat. Did they make a replacement for the 1.9 liter single over cam Escort motor non-Z-Tech for the Focus? So something between before the Z-Tech? An RX-7 would be cool, but my ideal one would be be like a 93. And then I wouldn't want to do anything to it except just have it be pretty and drive around. Yeah, Dave, just let me know. We'll get you hooked up with something. Bought an 82 RX-7, 88 and 85 Supras, 81 286 Turbo 81 FJ60 Land Cruiser. Nice. Burns, I don't know. I don't know about the stuff that happened before the Z-Tech Focus stuff. Never seen a blower on a rotary. And we could do it on a rotary because it's, you know, we could just have the little Mikuni 4-barrel carburetor just, you know, drawing into the, we could have put the carburetor on top of the blower. Dealing with a locked up 454 out of a sank boat. How long was it sanked for? Is it all rusted? Never seen a blower on a rotary. Didn't somebody make a blower kit for those? 371 on a 12.8 in 1986. Cool. RX-8 with a Miata motor. I'm not a fan of the RX-8. I actually don't like the way that they look. I like the Gen 3 RX-7. Rotors rev high for positive displacement. I agree, but so that just means we need to do a compound, right? You need to do a blower and a turbo. And do it with something that's bigger than an AMR 500. Like the MR2 cars, I know I'd love to have. I bought a new in 86. I bought an MR2 and I loved it. That was a very fun car. I'd imagine though those are probably money now, right? Blower that disconnects with the clutch and lets it. The clutching mechanism is probably not that hard to do. You just use the compressor off of a Mercedes instead of the MR 500, but then routing it past the blower becomes the problem. That's right, compound the world, because it's just cool. And LS, I agree, an Iron Duke Fiero would be ideal. Surface rust shouldn't be too bad. Caught fire, but we'll see. Oh, the boat caught fire, and that's what made it sink. Well, at least it put itself out, right? Didn't Hennessy do that with a Ford GT? What, a compound deal? They had been doing, people have been doing, like AccuFab did turbo stuff way back. Racer, you have an 88 Fiero? Did that Iron Duke come out of that Fiero? A Fiero, an Iron Duke Fiero would be good, or really anything with an Iron Duke in it, as long as the Iron Duke was running and it had a manual transmission. I don't want an automatic transmission. Find an old postal truck. Lots of good ideas. The MR500 is too big for my GoPed that I've been driving around. The Car Nut had an MR2 on his channel recently. I like those. I like the obviously like the twin cam Corollas too. I think that those are awesome. Duke came out of my 86 that I ran at Bonneville with the LNF engine. My 88 is a factory stock with the Duke in it. Cool. Richard, what cam is best for a 408 stroker for performance? So just tell me what kind of power you're making, and then or you want to make, and then what the rest of the combination is, and then what you're going to use it for. And we can steer you in the right direction for a camshaft. There isn't the best cam. I had this conversation with somebody yesterday who was trying to educate me about the David Vizard lobe separation angle scenario. All the while not understanding the subjective nature of camshafts. The 88 Duke didn't blow up yet. Impressive. The balancer oil pump assembly on those is like self-disassemble. It's designed to undo itself. There you go, KD. Call it the Phoenix. That'll be good. Problem with the Fiero with a stick trans is the 5 feet of shift cable makes it impossible to shift very fast. You know, I feel the same way. It's not quite as bad because it goes backward on the Fiero, but I feel the same way with the shifting on the Omni too. It's vague as being kind. I did miss fourth gear. Yes, fourth gear. A couple of times when I was drag racing it. You have to be very dedicated. I like David Vizard. I like David Vizard too. He and I get along very well. We've had this conversation before. I explained to him about why any formula, even if it did produce some sort of mythical universal result that was the best, that it's not. It can't be that, because that's not why people buy camshafts. Have you tested the intake mod, and would it be beneficial for low end torque to run twin turbos? I don't know what intake mod you're talking about. Having more airflow go into that motor is a good idea. It's not going to make more low end torque. That's primarily going to be the runner length. But that motor doesn't suffer for low end torque anyway. If it's in a truck right now, the lack of low speed torque that you're feeling is programming, because it's torque limiting. So that motor has all the low end torque that you could possibly use. And if you're running turbos on it, you're just going to have a ridiculous amount of power. I've ridden in fast boats before, and I'm a V drive flat bottom going 100 is more than enough. So 87, Michael, is the best year for a Iron Duke. Is the best, and is that in air quotes? It's all relative. How's our poll doing? Only 76% saying that I need to buy a project car. You guys disappoint me. That's right. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. I want to make 600 on the 408. Well, if you take a look at the video that I have up on the 175 horsepower camshaft, you'll see that one made 625. And so that's easily possible. It just takes good cylinder heads, a camshaft that's in the, mid 230s or something at 50, and a good intake. We ran a fast intake manifold on there. I still need an 86 Yugo. That's something you don't hear every day. 100 on the water is crazy. And it was when I was little too. It was way back. Our neighbor had a V-drive with some sort of hopped up L88 Corvette motor in it. And it was probably like a 18-foot V-drive, I think. So it only had the back-to-back seats on it, one front, one back. So I was sitting in the back facing the motor with the over the transom, zoomy headers on it. It was loud. For me at the time, it was pretty miserable. Nathan, that 240 cam that's in that video, that works pretty well. Something in that range. The big cam that we use, that stage 4 cam that Brian Tooley has, I don't know what heads you have on this, not that that matters really, but that stage 4 cam or the stage 4 Summit cam, all of those should put you up near that power level. I think that one probably was, I can't remember if that was a flat top or the other one that we use most often that was readily available was like a 8 or 10 cc dish also. I can't remember what the static compression was on that. We had airflow research heads on it, which worked very well. Obviously, they flow more than enough to support that power level. And I think that the cam we ran was a 240, 248 crane in that thing. Racer, so your boat with 85 horsepower would run 105? That's really fast. This boat was going 6,700 RPM or something, I think is what my dad said at the time. And it felt like it was going about 300 to me and all the loudness and stuff. Do you have a video comparing a BTR intake to a fast? Which one are you talking about? And I can tell you what it'll do. The BTR intake manifold, either the Trinity or the other one, is going to lose power up until the top of the RPM range. It's a short runner intake manifold designed to run at a very, very high engine speed, and the fast is not. So the fast will be better up to 6,500 or something. Been looking into the Summit Ghost Cam for my turbo 6-liter. That will work. I have a fully forged 4.3 V6 custom Pro Charger on it. Was thinking about compounding a turbo under the S10. Do have water meth as well, running a 270 114 LS blower cam. So you had somebody do a custom cam for that V6 that's based off of this blower cam. Is that what you're saying? Waiting for Brian Tooley to get some of his work on the Gen 3 Hemis. That data is already out, actually. He's done a bunch of they've done a bunch of 5.7 stuff already, and the cams are pretty good. And I'm getting ready to post a video of an intake test on the 5.7 Hemi. So we run the factory 5.7, I think a 6.4, a high ram, a single plane, and maybe something else. Atlas, how much power are you trying to make? And I actually wouldn't recommend compounding a Procharger with a turbo, because I don't think that that's going to do what you want it to do. I think you should just put a turbo on it, or just keep the Procharger on it. $99 miles an hour water is like 150 in a car. And because it feels like the water is like right at hull level, right at the edge of the hull. The boat was 100 pounds, the engine was 100 pounds, and the prop would go to 7,500 RPM. That's nice. Turbo size recommendation. What kind of power do you want to make? That's the question for the turbo. The bottom end can handle 900. So that's like S475 or 7875 territory. So you're making 750 now with this thing? So again, my suggestion would be not to run both of them. My suggestion would be just run the turbo. And what you'll find out is that whatever boost level you're running at, you're going to be 100 or 150 up from that. Oh, so it's not 750, it's 450. That's different. Yeah. Okay. So if you want to make 450, then a much smaller turbo, then that's just a GT45. Skog and Dickey messed up by not switching the SRT8 manifold during the pulls. Did they do it on the early motor, or did they do it on the later one? There's a lot. What's the deal with positive displacement blower cams? I don't really understand what your question is. There's a lot of tunes that make a lot of tunas that think just because they stroke a keyboard is magically better. I'll try to tell people on anything 2010 and up, you need to add 100 horsepower before it's worth screwing with it. 150 is as fast as I've gone in a car. I've gone a lot faster than a car at Bonneville, but it's I can tell you that there are some cars that feel like 1,000 miles an hour when you're not going that fast, and some cars, like my wife's Mercedes, you're so insulated from everything that like going 100 or something in that car just feels like nothing. Late model Eagle stuff, okay. Yeah, I have that red hat, and went we went 220 plus 227 or something in the Civic. That's as fast as I've gone. But going that speed at Bonneville was like nothing, except when the axle checked out, then it got fairly exciting. But going that fast, all that it was looking at the tack, going, come on, I need like 200 more RPM, just looking at that, go, 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 go. And then it became hold together, because the axle wanted to pop out and I was counter steering and dealing with all that. But it would have been cool to be able to make a run without any problems, go to the 5th mile, and then especially to be able to do it not at 16 pounds, but do it at like 20 pounds, because it was cold in the morning. The turbo was happy. The airfeel was good. It was all doing what it's supposed to do. And that would have been a fun run. I know that thing would have gone way into the 230s. It had more left in it. That's the famous saying. They left the long runners in for one pull, then turned on the short runners on a subsequent pull. Not how it works. So when we did the guys from Motor Trend did testing at West Tech with the dual runner intake that they had on that 5.7, and they ran some, they made pulls with just the long runner and just the short runner, and then put them both together and did what you're supposed to do. So you have the best of both worlds. And it worked out really good. And then they did different cams with all that, and it was good stuff. Dual runner intake manifolds are really, really very cool. And you see that when you run one and then run the other, and you're like, oh, it'd be really good if we had both of those. And then when you have both of those, it's kind of awesome. Tell Scott and Dicky to watch relay switch the runners properly. So did they just continue to run it with one set of runners? I mean, the guys at Scott and Dicky are good at what they do. I don't know why they wouldn't run. I mean, you get that's like not running VVT. It's, if you have a later model vehicle or a later model engine that has VVT and just turning it off. It's like guys not using VTEC on a Honda. Why would you do that? Yeah, hold together safety wire definitely comes in handy. Yeah, we couldn't have really safety wired in the axle, I don't think, but he admitted in the chats that they didn't switch it during the dyno pull. Yeah, and you're not there, I'm not there. You don't know what's going on during the dyno pulls. It would be better to have all the information and have all of the power, and you kind of want that, but What cubic inch displacement did you use on the 408 stroker video where you tested out the different cams? It was a 408. It was a 30 over 6 liter with a 4-inch stroke crank. And then we ran, I think, some sort of stock cam in that. Might have been the LM. I think it was the LM7 cam, which is, nobody would do that, but it's the least powerful stock cam. And then we ran like a 206 cam, and then maybe a 224 cam, and then the 239 or 240 cam. And then we ran something bigger than that ended up not helping power at all, which I thought was interesting given we had enough displacement and head flow and all that for that to work. But that particular cam, and that's why we test, that particular cam didn't work on that combination. And that was a shelf cam that people could buy. So if they're thinking about doing that, well, this cam made this much power, so if I step up 6 degrees of duration, it should make more power, is the thought process. And obviously that didn't happen. VVT and VTEC. Yeah, you want both of those. Honda does that. We disabled the VVT when cams come too long in duration, getting advantage from changing their timing. Yeah, if you run into and this is the other issue why people have problems with, this is one of the problems you have with, for instance, a really tight LSA camshaft, is that you start minimizing piston to valve clearance. And so there's a limit to where you can't have the valve in contact with the piston. So that limits what you can do on cam timing. And on the far side of the exhaust also too. So you have this window that you have to play in, and here's what you can do. These are the limitations. And you have to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room because you have to have enough piston to valve clearance for it to actually work. So you have that much space to work in. And so that's it, on a stock application, that's going to dictate that. When you are then swinging the cam, advancing, retarding the cam, you actually narrow that. And then if you put a bigger camshaft in, you narrow that further to where it just doesn't make any sense for you to even be trying to wiggle the cam around, because it's not going to, you just have very, very little room there. Does that happen even for simply total cam advance or retard, i.e. not changing the overlap with VVT, but just all forward or back? You can advance the cam too much and run into piston to valve clearance problems, depending on how big the cam is. On stock cams, you'd have to do it a lot because the factory stuff has a big swing. Not at wide open throttle. They're only normally moving camshafts 8 or 9 degrees at wide open throttle. That's not where they're doing it. They're not swinging the cam to make lots of power. It does help at wide open throttle, but they're swinging it for other things on park throttle and idle and drivability and stuff, and emissions. There's a 5.3 with a turbo kit for sale around here for $2,000, which surprised me. I mean, the kit isn't much to look at, but functional. NA cams can sometimes work better than stock cams in a turbo motor. The Dodge 2.2 NA cams and turbo cams don't exist. You just need to understand cam profile to get the power where you want. I tell people the same thing. you should ask yourself not about a turbo cam or a blower cam or an NA cam or a nitrous cam, especially for anything that you're driving around. You should ask yourself what you want out of the camshaft NA first. What do you want it to do? Do you want it to work with a stock converter? Do you want to have the chop? How much piston to valve clearance do you have? Are you towing with, what are the things that you're doing with the camshaft? Then you can add the other things. Then add nitrous on top of that, or add boost on top of that from a positive displacement blower, from a centrifugal blower. It doesn't matter. From a turbo, it doesn't matter. You can add on top of that. But because you're going to be driving around not under boost most of the time, you're going to be driving around asking that cam to do the things that you want the camshaft to do. If you're building a Formula One motor or an Indy motor or a Pro Stock motor, that's a whole different set of criteria. But that's not what the people that are going to get a wrecking yard, a motor from the wrecking yard and putting it in and putting a cam and springs in and adding a turbo are doing. And in that case, it doesn't matter. The reason that every cam is a turbo cam is because no matter what cam you put in there, if you put 1,000 horsepower turbo on there, it can make 1,000 horsepower. It's just going to take a different boost level to do it. And same thing with the cylinder heads. Do I need to run ported heads? Well, no. On an LS motor, if you put a cam and springs in it and you put 1,000 horsepower turbo on it, you're going to make 1,000 horsepower. The ported heads are just going to mean that you can make 1,000 horsepower probably at a slightly lower boost level, but you don't need it to get there. And so that's why the discussion is not about, hey, let's talk about specific valve events that you want to happen to make something happen. Look at the big picture first. And then if we want, we can go in and narrowly focus things. Yeah, and somebody mentioned the 2.2 stuff. The NA cam makes more power. It makes more power NA. So guess what it's going to do when you add boost to it? But what about all the overlap? That's going to kill the boost. It's all going to sneak out. No, that doesn't happen. If it makes more power NA, it's going to make more power under boost. I'd like to see a graphic rendition of how the phaser moves the cam and at what RPM. Do you want to see it at wide open throttle, or you want to see it at part throttle, or you want to see it at idle, or you want to see it at transition throttle? There's a lot of stuff going on. I was watching a video where somebody had a graphic of what the variable cam was doing, and then what it did to, you could see the valves and the pistons coming up and all that stuff. It's actually a pretty good graphic. Now, I don't remember if I saw it on Instagram or Facebook. SRT motors are great despite what people think of them. Realistically, what daily usable power can I expect from a 3800 with a turbo build? You see 600 horsepower with a cammed 3800 is not a problem at all. I want to get a wrecking yard engine. That's right. Do they advance the cam at mid, low, and mid RPM? They retard at a higher RPM. Traditionally, that's what you would do, is retard it at high RPM. Drunken Hamster, given the way that your comments yesterday, it's obviously you have an agenda. So you're steering I mean, this isn't my first rodeo. Not by a long shot. So you're trying to steer the conversation into getting information that you want to hear. If you're here to do that, just go somewhere else. That we're not interested in that. Okay. If you want to have a conversation about a camshaft that you want for an application that you want, we can help you do that. But I don't think you're here for that. I think you're here for something else. Do you have any Coyote engine videos? Yes, I do. I have some up. I did Coyote testing way back in late 2010, early 2011 with a then crate motor that they did. And I ran a Kenny Bell blower on it. We ran a turbo on it. We ran ported heads. We ran different cams. We ran a bunch of different intakes that were available at that time. We ran headers. We ran all that stuff. V6 sound great. Older ones, not the VQ. So you burns, you don't like the VQs? Contributed to my LS swap big time. Again, we start with the big picture and then we narrowly focus to the small picture. And for those that are asking, if you want to know what a camshaft does under boost, look at what it does NA. The real good example of that is an LS9 cam versus really any other cam. The LS9 cam is a factory blower cam. They didn't do it because they wanted a specific blower cam. They did it for lots of other reasons. And when you put, like if you compare it, look at the 5.3, we ran an LS9 cam. It wasn't designed for a 5.3. It wasn't designed for a naturally aspirated 5.3. But if you look at that comparison versus an LM7 cam, an LM7 cam makes a lot more power down low. And by down low, I mean up to 4,500 or 5,000 or something where the crossover was. Then the bigger LS9 cam makes more peak power. That's exactly what they do under boost. When you run a turbo on those cams, that's exactly what they do. The LS9 cam is way soft down low, and it's also way soft down low when you add a blower to both of those, or it's way soft down low when you add nitrous to both of those. That's what it does. So look at what the camshafts do NA, and that will tell you exactly what they're going to do under boost. 383 carb for the street. Is a 650 enough? Depending on how mild the 383 is. On a 383, I think I would normally run a 750. But, you know, if it's a 383 with stock heads on it and a really mild camshaft and it only makes 400 horsepower, a 650 probably is enough. The VQ 383 750. Yeah, that's kind of what I recommend. So we got one. I'm already here too late. We got one more minute. I know what the poll is going to be tonight. Drunken Hamster, for the answer to your question on the LS9 camshaft, you should ask the OEMs why they did that camshaft. Because a power standpoint, a power production standpoint is only one conversation when you're talking about OEM cams. The engineers didn't design the camshaft to make maximum power. That's never one of their criteria. Their criteria list for an OEM camshaft is very, very long. It has to cost this amount. It has to make this sort of power and torque curve. It has to have this kind of idle. It has to have this kind of like longevity. You know, it has to have this kind of fuel mileage. It has to have this kind of emissions. All of these things go into them designing this camshaft. And then this camshaft was probably one of lots and lots of camshafts that could also fulfill all of those requirements. It's just it ended up being this one. It's not an absolute. This is not the most powerful one by any stretch of the imagination, because that was not their design criteria. Putting an M112 on a low RAM on my 5.3 without an intercooler. Should I run water meth with pump gas? You'll be able to run more timing with that if you run some sort of cooling agent through it. The OEMs need to worry about fuel economy regulations, NVH, driveline durability, all that stuff. Yes, exactly that. That's exactly what all of those things. And I know that I know that when engineers see stuff like this, like they see videos from YouTubers, I guess I don't really count myself to be a YouTuber. It's what I do for a living now, but only because of what I did for a living for 30 years. They see this and must just laugh, because you know, you get a lot, especially young guys. You get a lot of young guys that are new to the industry. And by new, I mean, like they're maybe 10 years in, thinking, oh yeah, look at me. I've tuned this way better than the factory. And the engineers just have to be laughing, thinking, oh, these kids. Would it be possible for you to create a video hooking up a 3800 to the Holley system? I can show you what the two important wires are that somebody else showed us. Somebody else gave us the information on how to hook the Holley up to this. Otherwise, it's all the same. All we're just doing is getting the right signal from the 3800 to run the Holley. All we're doing is getting a crank signal. I think it is a crank signal, because we're not running sequential. We're running batch, and I normally run stuff under batch anyways. Can you walk through a Holley HP tuning of your 3800? Tuning it is very easy. Once you have it hooked up, tuning it is the same as tuning any LS. And I have videos up. I don't do tune videos because I'm not going to show you what numbers to put where. But what we do is the same procedure. We have low timing. We have it be rich, because on all the LSs or anything, I have something to start with. And even if I don't have something to start with, we would put enough fuel in it. And we do that by, on the dyno, let's say I'll set the dial at, let's say we want to start or run at 3,000, whatever the number is. We take all the timing out of it. So if it wants 29 or 30 degrees NA timing, I'll put it down at like 18 or 19 degrees. And we'll start rolling into the throttle, and then we'll watch the air fuel. Oh, it's at 15 to 1. Oh, okay, well, we obviously need to add a bunch of fuel. So I'll highlight all of the boosted area and add 20 clicks of fuel. What I want is I want to have way more fuel than I need. And then we'll roll into it. Oh, yeah, like, look, it's 11 to 1. Or it's 9 to 1. Okay, let's take away a bunch of fuel and see where we are. And then I'll do that. I'll roll in. Okay, and if I'll roll in and it's all like in the 11s, I'll roll in. Where it's not in the 11s, I make it in the 11s because it's a supercharge. Roll in, get it wide open throttle, park it at 3,000. Oh, look, it's 11.5 to 1. Okay, perfect. Do that at 3,500. Do that at 4,000. Pretty soon we get kind of a curve going here and go, okay, look, let's do a sweep from 3,000 to 4,500 or 5,000. And we'll do a sweep. We have no timing in it. I don't care what the power is. All we care about is that we have the right air fuel curve. So, oh, look, it's 11.5. Oh, it went to 13 to 1. Okay, look, at that part, from there on out, now we need to add even more fuel. So we add a whole bunch of fuel. Get it to be 11.5 all the way through, and then run it all the way out to, 6,000 or 6,500. Hey, look, it's 11.5. Okay, now let's start adding timing. Once we have the air fuel safe, we start adding timing. And we do that on whether it's a 3800 or an LS or a small block Chevy, small block Ford, whatever it is. That's my procedure for doing it. Auto tune and smoothing. I don't run closed loop. If I did that, I would do that maybe for part throttle stuff, but I don't do that at wide open throttle. I like doing it manually. That's just a personal preference. But you can do closed loop stuff. It will adjust that. And as long as it will adjust that and change that row or column and keep it there, that's okay. You're disappointed with auto tuning. I don't like to do that. Brule likes that. He's learned Holley stuff, and with Eric and Ish there, obviously, and he knows motors, so he knows what they should be, and so he likes filling in. Hey, look, I want all of this boosted area to be 11 to 1 or 11.5 to 1, so you can auto populate that and show where you want it to be on all these different boost levels. And then you enable closed loop, and you can roll into the throttle and let it start self-correcting, and you can do all that. I don't like doing it like that. I like having it be right when when I get to full throttle. And on that note, it is time to go. I've been here a really, really long time. My dogs are getting hungry. But I will see you guys all tonight.